seems to be missing the ecological part of the argument, which is that we are in overshoot. And keeping this very narrow focus on sort of the bad guys being the oil companies, the bad guys are the climate deniers, the bad guys are now the doomists, as he calls them. He doesn't even call them doomers, they're doomists, right? So this framing of bad guys, and it's us against them, you know, I need the environmentalists to be on my side against these people, and they're doing the bidding of the oil companies. No, this is overshoot, this is overpopulation, this is the inevitable consequence of what fossil fuels have brought us, which is an environment of virtually unlimited exponential growth for almost 200 years, right? And there's absolutely no question what happens in overshoot, which is collapse.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This week on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, we have a special guest, Elliott Jacobson, who's a relatively new voice in the doomosphere. His essays and his videos have reached quite a few people in a very short period of time, and he's gotten lots of positive feedback about that, including from me. Really excited to speak with Elliott because he brings such a rich and very different background than most of us in the doomosphere. So please help me welcome Elliott Jacobson. Hi there, and welcome to another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. I am your ever-present host, Dean Walker, and it is a gorgeous, just drop-dead gorgeous day here in Southern Oregon. It's Thursday, January 27th on the west coast of the USA, and I am really pleased to be speaking with today Elliott Jacobson. He's a relative newcomer to the doomer community, and with his blog, which is just consistently excellent. We were just talking about, as we met before this recorder got turned on, we got to talk a little bit about his meteoric rise to well-knowndom here in the doomosphere. And Elliott, I've just been so pleased to watch that rise, and I think it's well deserved. You have a way with words that, as we were talking about, some of the people I really respect for their consistency and the quality of how they present in this environment. Gail Zawacki, Sam Mitchell, and I'm certain there are others. So bear with me if I don't list out other people that I know and respect from the community who have commented on your work. And, I know you've been doing a few interviews, and for those who watch all those other channels along with this one, I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't mind just giving the brief bio, because if I'm understanding correctly, you've been a mathematics professor who's always, it seems like, been a bit quirky. And by that, I mean, for someone to basically commit themselves to figuring out how to beat the system in many gambling situations, that's quirky enough for me, because it's something it's not even in my world to imagine doing that. And I'm certainly no math whiz myself. But then you really took it on to make it available to the average person. And it's no surprise to me. I'm going to see if I can find it really quick here. It's no surprise to me that you've come up with your signature of late, which is be kind, be generous, and be of service. So even back when your main focus was being a math professor, and evidently researcher of sorts, you know, in that whole pursuit around demystifying the gambling experience. There's something very, very human about how you present and what you present now that you're in this doomosphere environment. The stakes are higher here, if you don't mind me throwing a pun in there. And I know that you know that by the words you choose, by the topics you choose. We're going to talk a little bit about one of your recent postings, the demise of hopium. And of course, Elliot, I'm going to be putting all the links to whatever we talk about today, whatever you'd like in terms of people contacting your work. I'm happy to do that. So let me just calm it down for a second in terms of what little I can do in terms of introducing you and why I would want to have this conversation with you. And just thank you so much for being here. Really looking forward to this conversation with you. And now that you've really let me know more about your sister and how she contributes to this conversation, in fact, to this blog post, I'm looking forward also to speaking with her if she would be kind enough to come and join me here. Elliott Jacobson, welcome. Great to have you on the Poetry of Predicament. Great to have you in this community. And if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit, whatever way you'd like to be known, briefly about your history and about your present, you know, what really brought you to land here? What makes this important to you? And so again, welcome. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you for this very kind invitation. And I really appreciate the platform just to talk about this subject and everything else that's going on. The world is just getting hard right now. It's getting genuinely hard for all of us. And I think just beginning by acknowledging that place, that hurt that we're all in, that we're bearing every day in greater and greater quantity as we witness what's going on. It's just worth starting there with how much it hurts. And just to give you a brief elevator summary of my life, I was a PhD in mathematics. I did the whole tenure track research thing at Ohio University. And I was a bridge burner. I was a cop, and essentially what I did was I would track down all of the malfeasance going on in our department and report it up the chain of command or do what I needed to do. And there was a lot of trouble. That brought a lot of trouble in my life. I ended up having my tenure bought out in 1997. I moved to Santa Barbara. My family was in Los Angeles. And I was lucky to have a walk-on job in the Department of Computer Science at UC Santa Barbara as a visiting associate professor that eventually became a teaching position. And along the way, I developed a fascination with casino gambling. And I thought that might be an alternative lifestyle for myself. And I did my best to be a professional gambler. And what it boiled down to is I just didn't have the nerve to put down the big money. But I did have the mind for the analysis. And so I spent roughly almost 20 years sort of as a researcher, producing strategies and computer simulations and this sort of thing. And in fact, in just a couple of weeks, I'm going to be getting a Lifetime Achievement Award at the World Game Protection Conference in Las Vegas in mid-February for my work in the casino industry, sort of showing how you can legitimately beat games. And most people know about card counting. So I essentially started with blackjack card counting and went from there. I retired in 2017 and just devoted my life to volunteerism and did every volunteer thing I could. Just decided that now that all of that's in my past, that this idea of being of service was going to be the number one thing in my life. And did a whole host of things, including being a docent for elephants at our local zoo, helping out the opera company, and I joined our local police force as a police volunteer, And during this time, roughly around 2017, when I retired, I started doing this research on climate change, really investing myself in the same videos and reading and that sort of thing. And the thing was that as long as I was with the police department, I sort of felt like I couldn't say anything, that I didn't want to be controversial. I didn't want to, in any possible way, put myself out there and create some sort of conflict that the department had to deal with. So it was when I left that volunteer position, June of last year, that I said, okay, now's the time. Everything that's building inside of me, all of this stuff that's been in me for years and years and years, I've got to start writing it down. And that's when this started for me. So that's kind of the genesis. I got this domain name, climatedisaster.net, and just started writing. I got a Twitter account and just started posting. And for whatever reason, people took notice, and I'm very happy about that.
Great, man, that was beautifully concise and rich. I'm curious, just a little pocket of clarity, if you don't mind, and I mean no pressure in any part. If there's anything you'd rather pass on, just let me know. But there was something you said about having sort of a cop role, even back in academia, where you were able to sniff out some improprieties, some things that just didn't seem right, and you took it on yourself to speak about it, to name it, to bring it to light, and that got you in some trouble. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that? Because well, my motive for asking about it is that I think we're in the midst of the largest scale mass persuasion of, and propagandizing of, and influencing of humanity at large that's ever been seen. It's Edward Bernays's worst nightmare of the Frankenstein escaping from the lab. And for people like yourself, and many of us in the doomosphere, we see it, we're trying to name it, and the best we get is gaslit and ignored and rejected by the people, even sometimes the people closest to us, family members, friends, certainly workmates, and so on. So I'm not surprised that you tried to hold some integrity. It wasn't, as far as I can understand what you're saying, it wasn't in any way climate related or environmental related, but it was still a matter of deep integrity for you, something that you were willing to and wanting to stand for, and it got you in trouble. So I'm just using that as a metaphor or a simile of what, I guess my question is to you, what was that like for you to kind of feel the heat come back at you when it was something that was clearly, you were just naming what was not right? Would you mind saying more about that?
Well, I think that's a great question. It really is how I've lived my life. And in many ways, it is the genesis for what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. I'll just give you one example. When I was in my second year as a professor, I was proctoring the PhD exam for graduate students. And one of the students, I caught them cheating, that they had the questions and the answers given to them by a professor in the department who wanted their student to do very well on this exam. And that professor had actually helped write the exam and coach the student on the questions. And it turns out that professor was the senior faculty member of the department who was responsible for hiring me and was in charge of my own promotion and tenure. So I had to report the senior faculty member in my area to our chair, and eventually got reprimanded by the dean, and there was all sorts of other problems. But as you can imagine, he took as much revenge as he could possibly take against me for years and years, including reduced raises. The vote for my tenure was 17-1. He did everything he could to not get me tenured, right? He was still the only vote. That was just one example of many. So I sort of started my life burning bridges. I mean, if I had any sense about me, I would have realized if you do this, it's going to make your life hell. But I did it over and over again to the point where it made me sick, right? I just thing after thing after thing I would find and report and get in trouble and have revenge. And it made me absolutely loathe academia, at least at that level of school, at the sort of second or third tier of school. Now, when I went to UC Santa Barbara, it was entirely different. At these top tier schools, the integrity and the brilliance of the academics is, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful to behold. But at these, so I'm very much anti-tenure at lower level schools. And I think my personal experience is part of that. And then when I was in the casino industry, it was the same thing. I just burnt bridges everywhere. I burnt bridges by telling the truth. And my whole career in the casino industry was having people who were players not like me, having people who designed games, casino games not like me, have people who run casinos not like me, have CEOs of corporations not like me, because I kept on just exposing this stuff over and over again. So for me, this is sort of like this cop thing inside of me, this policeman side inside of me, that when it's bullshit, I just want to say, hey, this is total BS. Here's what's true. Let me just say what's true in the simplest language I possibly can. So that's kind of what my experience has been like over the years.
Yeah. Well, really, again, well laid out and in a compact form. I just so appreciate it. And I hope you see with me that, it doesn't take much of a stretch for me to pull that framing up into what you and I are going to be mostly talking about in this time. Where you've gotten yourself is, I believe, right in the middle of the largest moral dilemma that humanity's ever had to face. And the kind of dynamics you're talking about, the kind of vilification that you'd be subject to in what you've been describing. I think all of us know, all of us in the doomosphere who have active voices and are aware of how incredibly well equipped the business as usual paradigm is to suppress voices, to make it very, very difficult for the truth to be told, painful for the truth teller, to be sure. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of launch in that direction.
Go for it.
I got another little clarifying question from your introduction. You mentioned that you've already caught some heat from Guy McPherson, and I'm just really curious, like, what did you say that pissed him off?
Well, I don't really want to relitigate the issues in particular, but he often refers to the IPCC 1750 baseline, and that there's been 2 degrees of warming since that date. And I actually put a video up on my site where I go through that analysis and very clearly saying, look, there's been nothing like 2C of warming since 1750. First of all, the 1750 baseline doesn't exist. That's a single year. You never have a single year baseline. The IPCC loosely refers to the start of the industrial age or the 30-year period centered at 1750. But in the latest AR6, they have a long explanation of the research and the exact reason why they switched from 1750 to 1850 to 1900 as a concrete solid starting point. So they talk about the total emissions, the amount of heating that's taken place, estimates for climate change, what's happened in that period. And there's just no way we're at 2C. There's just absolutely factually no way. And that's one of his sort of bullet points that he repeats over and over. So there were roughly 3 or 4 bullet points that I've put up that just directly contradict what he thinks. So he has let me know very personally and very directly that he doesn't appreciate essentially what he views as me saying that he's acting, he's exaggerating or acting unethically.
Yeah, thank you. Again, really clear. I appreciate it. I know that Guy has that reputation for doggedly holding to particular points of view and so on. And to be fair, I think that it has shown up time and again in a certain percentage of his work and presentations that they hold strong, and they're based on people's good faith reports and studies and so on. So yay for him in those dimensions. And I think as many of us being human beings and all of us being engaged with this, the most important topic in human history, opinions can run kind of hot. And so when it gets to opinions and doggedly holding on to a point of view argumentatively, I think he's as subject to that as anyone. So I really actually appreciate your point, and I'll look for the others that you're pointing toward that you have those differences with Guy. I have not followed those threads. I have done lots of research. I put out a book in 2017 called The Impossible Conversation, choosing reconnection and resilience in a time of, at the end of business as usual. And I followed innumerable threads to get, and I researched for a couple of years to be able to put that book out. I'm not a scientist of any kind, but I have become conversant in just about every one of the stack of existential predicaments that we're in. I actually am sick to death of the climate change conversation because it's, to me, a very controlled narrative by the powers that be. And it's clear that the IPCC is a joke, after 26 years, 26 times going around that circle and having nothing but increase of intensity and acceleration of every measure, every negative measure. I'm going to stop my thread there because I wanted to get back to you make mention of Michael Mann in the demise of hopium posting. And for me, he's a really clear exemplar of how it can go if a person of note, a person who's got some public limelight, if that person speaks in a way that is not flattering to the powers that be, to the status quo, that person will be attacked ruthlessly until they submit one way or another. And if that person shifts to a far less threatening posture toward the status quo, that they can enjoy continued benefits of the comforts of our world. And I believe that that's a short version of the Michael Mann story, because as well as I, he wrote a book, The Climate Change and the Hockey Stick and the Climate Wars. And the amount of abuse that he's taken from the critics would just scare the crap out of me. That he really earned his stripes, so to speak. But where he is now, in this bizarre, twisted, almost, he reminds me of the R.P. McMurphy character at the end, where he's been lobotomized and there's just no there anymore. And he's even taken to vilifying doomers or the deep adaptation community and so on. I'm wondering if that sparks you in any way, that you'd like to just follow that thread for a while.
I was undergraduate advisor to our pre-meteorology program at Ohio University when I was a professor there, and everybody wanted to go where Michael Mann is, right? That was the destination. Right. That's the best school, bar none.
Still
right?
is,
And
yeah.
he is a senior researcher at one of the finest universities in the world. So far be it from me to contradict his meteorology, right?
Right.
But he seems to be missing the ecological part of the argument, which is that we are in overshoot. And keeping this very narrow focus on sort of the bad guys being the oil companies, the bad guys are the climate deniers, the bad guys are now the doomists, as he calls them. He doesn't even call them doomers, they're doomists, right? So this framing of bad guys, and it's us against them, you know, I need the environmentalists to be on my side against these people, and they're doing the bidding of the oil companies. No, this is overshoot. This is overpopulation. This is the inevitable consequence of what fossil fuels have brought us, which is an environment of virtually unlimited exponential growth for almost 200 years, right? And there's absolutely no question what happens in overshoot, which is collapse. This is a given, right? This is not something that we will somehow avoid.
Yeah.
So for me, the problem with Michael Mann is that he is living in this sort of duality, you know, this idea that there are still good guys and bad guys out there, and that we have to attack the bad guys. We have to go after them. And now I'm one of his bad guys. I mean, one of the first things that happened to me, and this shocked me, was he blocked me on Twitter, right? I said one thing in one post and I got blocked. And then I started realizing everybody gets blocked by Michael Mann, who doesn't agree with him,
Yes.
right? So
yes, indeed.
And so that kind of little capsule he's put himself in, where he surrounded himself with just yes men who all focus on climate issues at the expense of the planet, right? Of everything. It just irritates the hell out of me, quite honestly. So I think what CNN or CBS needs is they need a doomer, you know, to be on right after Michael Mann to say, look, this guy is myopically focused on fossil fuels and climate. And that's just one symptom of the problem we're facing. That's one symptom. That is not a problem we will solve by some transition to green energy and all fossil fuels. So I guess that's the basis of my my experience with him right now.
Yeah. Well, that's you've just brought up another point that has really got my attention when I started to listen to your videos and read your blog, is that you have that point of view that you've just been expressing, that this climate change is just one narrow fragment of a extraordinarily broad, existentially grounded stack of predicaments. And I agree with you completely. And that I've did a series last year. I'm still trickling a few episodes of it into this year with the podcast, where I was talking about my favorite science communicators and my not so favorite science communicators. And you can guess which end of the spectrum Michael Mann is on. And I excerpted an interview that it was just a book-selling interview with Bill Nye, the Science Guy, interviewing Michael Mann. And they were just trouncing around in the issues that you've just laid out, and really made a point, as he does in the book, of speaking about the doomists and also the deep adaptation community, which is just absurd. I've been involved with deep adaptation since the beginning, and to vilify it in any way is just absurd. It's like saying being sad when your relative dies is a bad thing, and so those are bad people who get sad when their relative dies. You know, it's a simplistic example, but I think you get the point. I'm actually scared of where this can go. At the rate at which people last year in the controversial world of the whole pandemic conversations which was insane at both ends of that extraordinary topic. But I also saw people being deplatformed and being taken out. So a person like yourself, you've got your blog, you're up and coming, you've got this voice and you're completely clear, and it's a wonderful service that you're providing. You could be deplatformed really quickly now and there's no one to talk to. There's no complaint department, and so the stakes are again very, very high. Is there anything else in this part of the conversation that is kind of coming to you, or perhaps you've realized it for a while, where there are, I don't want to say traps, but there are certain lines that one learns not to cross in terms of speaking the truth? Or does it still look like pretty much clear sailing ahead for you?
Well, that's an excellent question. And curiously, just the other day, I read a document. Apparently, Michael Mann is putting a lot of pressure on YouTube to censor climate denier YouTube videos, which his argument is, well, you already censor COVID vaccine denying, right? So you should go ahead and remove all the climate deniers, the people who argue there is no climate change taking anthropogenic cause. But apparently he's also adding to that doomers should be part of that mix too, that you should not have, doomers should not be able to have a platform on YouTube. So to have Michael Mann sort of going after me personally like that, it kind of shocked me for a second, and I realized, he could do that. This very well may happen, because this idea of maintaining the status quo, the illusion with as many people for as long as people, seems to be the objective here. I don't understand the motivation for it, but it does seem to be the objective, to maintain the illusion. And Michael Mann seems to be in the middle of that. And I mean, the guy is so smart. I can only assume he knows it, right? I can only assume he understands overshoot. I mean, how could he not? He's a smart guy.
Yeah.
So at some level, this must be part of a plan he has. This must be something he has conceived of as a strategy, right? Yeah. And I'm not sure what the goal of that strategy is. I sort of cynically in my article said, well, maybe it's to protect his own ego and greed. He wants to have more TV appearances and sell more books. That's a reason to spin this narrative, right? And to block and silence people who are expressing the real science that's going on.
Yeah.
But whatever his motivation, I do believe he knows. I do believe he knows, and I do believe it's a conscious decision he's making to narrow the focus of the conversation down to a problem that he thinks can be solved, at least to some measure, rather than the larger, wholly unsolvable problem that civilization is collapsing around us today.
Great. Well, first, if there's any way, perhaps after this conversation, if there's any way I could get a link from you about anything that you were just talking about, Michael Mann's petitioning to have that kind of suppression of content on YouTube, I'd sure appreciate it, because that's news to me, and even more terrifying. The level of control of the narrative globally has always been pretty tough, but in these past 10 years or so, it's just skyrocketed. So so there, and not to put too fine a point on it, but that's what you're just describing. It looks like, to me, if we look at the story that he so beautifully lays out, so vulnerably lays out, about how his attackers for years, came close to just destroying his career. There was just everything was at stake for him. And isn't it interesting that he's now no longer suffering those slings and arrows? They are not happening for him. In fact, he enjoys clear sailing. So he's on every network. He's the go-to guy for the conversation. And so is it really any surprise that the core of his message is get out there and vote, do the things that really make a difference in our world, recycle and change your light bulbs. And did I mention vote? Go out and vote. And, I'm going back and being a bit silly about the content from that Bill Nye, Michael Mann conversation that I'm talking about from my episode last year. But it doesn't get any more Thorazine laced safety in terms of a message for him to put out there. No wonder he's no longer under attack.
So I would completely agree with his message at that level. I think people should be voting and people should be doing everything they can to be an activist to whatever extent that's a choice they want to make. I don't think we should have an authoritarian voice telling us that we're only good people if we do these things, and we're not good people if we don't do these things, right? There's plenty of, if we really understand that we are in planetary hospice, right? We are in the hospice, we are in the 5 stages, right? Then sure, we want to encourage people to continue living their lives as fully as possible for the time remaining. And if part of living a life means politically active or environmentally active or spiritually active or whatever it is, I'm 100% behind that. I think everybody should be as active as they can, but don't be active to the, and at the same time be ignorant of what's coming. I mean, this is really, truly the end, right? And so when the problem is not that man is suggesting these things, is that he is suggesting them with the built-in illusion that somehow we can preserve our civilization and our exponential growth and our increasing wealth and let's go put some people in some lithium, get some more lithium mined slaves, so that we can have our battery powered Teslas. I mean, there's a certain first world cruelty about it as well, that we, the entitled rich Americans and Europeans who can afford all these fancy products should just go out and vote, right? That's all we need to do. Or all we need to do is stop using fossil fuels. No, that is just mean-spirited in ways that I don't think he could ever really fully understand. It's mean to groups of people who live around the world who are sifting through trash piles, right? Or they are out there dealing with plastics in their front yard that are, filling their rivers. And that's our plastic, right? These are our batteries doing this to those people. So I absolutely, and this is very much dating back to my time as a university professor, I absolutely see the cruelty behind much of what Mann is proposing, the implicit cruelty to billions of people around the world in trying to maintain the status quo of civilization for another generation.
Yeah, really beautifully said. I would just like to do this loop one more time, perhaps just a bit more focus on, yes, okay, it's good that he endorses that we stay engaged with the voting process, the democratic process. That's swell. You can hear by my choice of words that I've given up on that process long ago, and I'm clear it is truly hopeless in that direction. It's a whole nother story. So I can understand why he's endorsing that, and I can understand why I'm asserting that that he's taken that stance to take the pressure off of him so that he can enjoy a life free of being threatened every day, as he was for so long. I think it's also important to start to notice some of the elements that clearly are sending some shivers through the powers that be. There's a reason why I would say, I'm going to kind of show you my hand here in terms of the nature of my work. The nature of my work is to, here's the elevator pitch, to offer transformative support and resources to people bravely facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. So what I would assert here is that it's actually threatening to have people become aware of what's actually going on, first and foremost, just really getting a clear picture at a global scale of what's going on. Then to be able to find a place where it is safe to experience together the sometimes very difficult emotions that come with that realization. And for someone to be able to go through that layer, there's a sovereignty that starts to happen, a deep sovereignty, an existential sovereignty, which our culture has been thrashing and kicking out as much as possible from our collective experience. They don't want a sovereign populace. If you find a better way to couch, particularly this attack on the deep adaptation community, the doomist community, and so on, particularly the deep adaptation community, because that's all they do, is provide a safe container where people who, whether they've been in the conversation for 2 decades or 2 days, they're welcome. There's a safe place to be able to feel what they're actually feeling and to be able to move through that experience of those awkward emotions into a place of being able to reclaim center, to actually be aware and feel with others, hold space for others. That's a powerful populace who can, if any number of them, appreciable number of them, get that skill. Interesting that that's threatening, but I believe it is one of the most authentic and important threats to the business as usual paradigm, is a populace that realizes more of their core experience of what it is to face an existential threat for real. No, don't look up, but like that end scene is extraordinarily poignant. And I would assert that that's where people land together, in that dinner scene where they all say, we really did have it all, didn't we? And they start to settle into what are the core messages that are really authentic motivators for me here in this real moment, maybe the first real moment I've had in my whole life. So I don't want to pull too far into there, but does that spark you to say anything?
So I think the entire capsule that I forgive me for this, but of what you're saying is under the word hopium. And that's exactly what I wrote in my article, that hopium is the glue that is holding our failed civilization together right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just Michael Mann, it's everywhere, right? Every news media, every academic journal article, every new book, every man on the street talking about it, that they're going to do something, right? There's going to be some way we'll get out of this. And that narrative is absolutely pervasive in our society. So if we look at sort of a bell curve, right, then 3 standard deviations on one side are the deniers, 3 standard deviations on the other side are the doomers, right? And then there's all of this gunky, mixed up, confused nonsense hopium that everybody else is putting out. And the problem is that hopium is keeping us from an authentic life. As you say, it's keeping us from dealing with an emergency that is real and present today, and is, if we knew about it, we would make different choices. And in my article, I sort of created this fantasy world, which is a little bit what you were talking about with Jem Bendel community, is this fantasy world where everybody in it acknowledges that we're going to have the consequences of overshoot and collapse, right? Everybody knows that. This is now, you make the assumption everybody knows. What does that world look like? Well, clearly civilization collapses very quickly, but people make choices also, right? Some people will still be environmentalists. Some people will still have hope, even though it's clearly, meaningless. Some people will kill themselves, right? Some people will cash out and go on a big party for their remaining days. Some might be a billionaire and buy an island and build, a place to try and live it out. Who knows what it is? But I think having the true factual information being presented by everyone, right? Everybody who knows it should say it. And Michael Mann knows it, right? Housefather knows it, right? Everybody who knows it and is not saying it, right? Catherine Hayhoe should say it. They should be saying this loud and clear every opportunity they get. This is not rocket science, seeing what's coming. So for me, the tragedy of today is that this marginalization of the truth about our future is harming a lot of people. And it's even harming people who will be born a year from now, who might not be born if their parents had the awareness of what's coming, right? A different choice might be made. And that's a child that's going to suffer horribly in their future. So, I mean, just ordinary choices we might make that are life choices about should we have an offspring or not, are the sort of critical choices that people might genuinely make a more compassionate choice if they knew this information. Yeah. So yeah, I think that it's cruel to purposefully hold on to what's coming as some sort of, and marginalize it the way, Michael Mann and all these other people do. I think it's cruel to massive numbers of people who would make different choices if they knew the truth of what's coming.
Really beautiful. Do you mind if I read a paragraph from your post, The
Please do.
Demise of Hopium?
Please do.
The demise of hopium will allow humans to regain their agency, even if it happens at a time of great suffering. This brainwashing, greenwashing, fucking lie that pervades every aspect of culture, media, and politics will be gone. Yes, some people will go down a path of disengagement, as Mann says, but that will be their choice. And disengagement will not be wrong just because it doesn't fit Mann's agenda for what they should be doing.
Right.
So,
that's exactly right. I mean, that summarizes where this sort of fantasy world, but you mentioned deep adaptation. So essentially, what deep adaptation is it's a little cell of this world, right? They've created sort of an enclosed ecosphere or mindosphere where people all understand this basic truth and are trying to work through what do you do now? What do we do as a community? What do we, to handle the incredible emotional, turmoil that this brings on in your life, just the simple choices we make day to day. So yeah, I think it's very important that we understand the need for community in the doomer world, right?
Yeah.
That we understand that there are like-minded people who all share a common understanding that this thing is coming, and that we need to be together. We need to be able to talk with each other. We need to be able to process grief and anger and resentment and all those questions in our lives.
Yeah. I'd like to do two things. Go back to the top of your demise of hopium posting, and you include a couple of definitions of hopium. So if I may, first one is irrational or unwarranted optimism. And the second one is that deranged condition in which a person is deluded into thinking humanity will survive omnicide, which I'm guessing, like Sam Mitchell did, I'm guessing that that's a Gail Zawacki definition that's in the Doom for Dummies blogspot.com site where that was pulled from. I just really wanted to give, there are going to be people who watch this who don't know what hopium is, and we've been talking for 45 minutes about it. So I wanted to just bring in what you were providing as a couple of definitions of it. I'd also like to perhaps I could just unfold a little bit of more of what the orientation of my particular spot in the doomosphere is about. I'm not nearly as good at providing the kind of doom scrolling, updates. They're important updates from so many of the folks who do YouTube channels or other kinds of presentation on a regular basis in the doomosphere. And I really appreciate them. I watch them on a regular basis. But where I've positioned myself ever since I wrote that book, The Impossible Conversation, I wanted to find somebody's offering some place where I could find some support, some sense of community, and also some other possibility than just learning how to be the textbook resilient. In other words, if I get knocked over by an event in life, how well am I able to return myself to an upright and functional position? That's really basic. I call it first aid level resilience skills. I offer those for folks who are at that level, and I gleefully do that, and because it's important. Those kind of skills, according to the well-known social scientist Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face. And there's a whole lot of people that will be in that particular pocket of human existence forever, all the way till whatever the end is for them.
Yep.
And God bless them. We all need those skills. I'm not sure I won't be freaking out and hitting the edge of my capacity if we get another firestorm. A year ago, last September, we had a firestorm that came through our area, and it put more than 10,000 people out on the street. And that's a punch in the face, if ever, there's a definition there that qualifies. What I'm interested in doing in this body of work is inviting people to see progression, if they so choose, to go beyond business as usual into the first aid level of resilience skills, so that they can, instead of freaking out when they're burned out of their house, they have the ability to bring themselves back to just be present at the most basic level, so that they can be of service in some minimal way to the people they love. I mean, isn't that what surviving an event like that is about? So for the people who start to see, man, there's a skill set I don't have and I need to learn. So I need to get on this so I can take care of my family, that kind of thing. That whole middle zone in the model that I use is, I call it practices of reconnection, assuming that what got us into this predicament is our complete and utter disconnection from the primary sources of meaning and relationship in human life. There's a whole lot to be said about that, but that's the short version. Then there's one last dimension that I've seen time and again, I've seen it in my own experience for decades, is if I sincerely take on those practices of reconnection with deeper self, with other people, with earth, and I say even with soul, I start to experience something unpredictable. And for this, it's this third and final stage in this simplistic model that I'm talking about. And I call that the transformative. And that is not at all, there's not a hopium, speck of hopium in sight in this dimension, but it is an extraordinary level of aliveness and awareness of presence that the other dimensions don't invite. So it's an extraordinary progression if a person puts themselves on that track. What I have seen in myself and in a number of other people is it's like the ultimate answer to a question that I either hear directly asked or I read between the lines and hear it every day, is we're in a world of desperation and of fear of, because people really, the vast majority of people know stuff's not going well. At the very least, they know, yeah, there's something to this whole climate change stuff and all that. So the question is, if not the default desperation or denial or fear, then what? And what's extraordinarily difficult to convey to someone who's really in that binary, stuck in that rut of fear and desperation, is there's an extraordinary richness and depth of aliveness available right in the middle of the fiercest part of the predicament. That's the transformative, but it's like speaking a very foreign language. There is no listening for it, and people don't know that they don't know that there is this extraordinary possibility to be vitally alive in the midst of this predicament. I'm curious if that sparks you.
I believe what you're doing by offering that is necessary and purposeful, and that there will be many, many people who will be able to follow and get value out of that vision for sort of the transition from, like you said, the middle part, right? So the awareness part, the collapse part when and the vast middle ground, which in some sense we're already in that middle ground, you and I, and yes, many other people who have this awareness. So how do we live our lives day to day right now? What choices do we make? And for me, I say this over and over again: kindness, right?
Yes.
Kindness, right? And what does kindness look like in practice? It's not losing your temper at the grocery store. It's helping somebody lift a package. It's whatever whatever way you can find in a moment, every moment, with that awareness. How can I be kind right now? What can I do that's a kind act? It is a continual awareness of mind, right? Service means actual service. It means finding a way to invest yourself in your community, whatever your community is, right? And for me, right now I'm still at the zoo, and right now I've been volunteering at the local COVID vaccination clinics. Unfortunately, because of COVID, almost all of my service got shut down, and it's been hard to even find anything to do. And the last is be generous. Now, not everybody has that ability, but for me, that generosity, we wrote into our trust that we wanted to make gifts to certain nonprofits, from any amount that we might have left over. Well, we're making those now, right? We're not waiting. We're saying now, forget it. I don't want to, the world might not be around, those nonprofits might not be around, they could use it today. So we're sending money for food pantries and sending wildlife donations and all sorts of things like that. So as much as you're able, nobody can expect you to give money you don't have or resources you don't have. But there's sort of another point to this, which is there is such a massive need for this thing you're talking about. I just want to tell you one experience I had. I was, I'm in the local opera. I do a walk-on character. I can't sing, right? So I just do walk-on characters in sort of famous operas. I was in a Puccini opera recently as a walk-on character. One of the people who I had a beautiful singing role, had the next seat over from me in the dressing room. He was a little 25-year-old kid. And I just asked him, I said, do you ever think about climate change, right? Because, just to talk about something with this kid.
Because that's just who you are.
Because it's who I am, right? I just want to know. And he says to me, yeah, I think about it all this time. I'm terrified. That was his response. And I said, well, do you ever talk about it with your friends? And he said, yes, that's all we talk about. And it's like, holy crap, this is not something that like smart people are just putting away in some closet to bring out when they have time. This is something that people are absolutely obsessing over throughout our culture. And to be lied to, with this hopium BS over and over again, they see through that lie, a lot of these people. They see right through it. And they really are looking for, what do I do now today to deal with this pressure I have in my life that is driving me crazy, that the planet might not be around for the rest of my life to support me. How do I live my life in that world? So I think what you described there is a really good answer for that, and an answer I don't have that answer. I just have what works for me, which is what I say.
Yeah. I love the way that you've created that signature for yourself. Be kind, be generous, and be of service. And while you were speaking, I was looking at all those words fit very well in kind of my core as I look at what am I standing for. And I think the only thing I might add in for myself is be curious. A big part of what I work with people on is how do we connect with other people, especially people who are not like ourselves. And, there's so much polarization, so much difficulty in connecting for people. And that's about the only addition I might put in that lovely, lovely signature that you put on is...
Let me just add something to that then.
Great.
I do have an essay on my website, climatedisaster.net, one of the very first ones I wrote. And I wrote this just after reading through Facing Extinction by Catherine Ingram. I just wanted my own version of it, based on how I felt. And I make that point in this essay that doomers are curious, right? They want to know the science, they want to understand what's happening. And yeah, it's just right here. Doomers support environmental activism, doomers grieve, right? Doomers view this crisis as an opportunity, right? This is not just a crisis. This is an opportunity to change ourselves, our own view of what's important to us in the world and how we can be better citizens of the planet during this hospice process. So yeah, I completely agree with you about curiosity. I'm not going to put it in, but I definitely agree with you.
That's fine. Yeah. Well, Elliot, I think I just have one last question for you before we close up. I'm hearing that in the formality of how you've shown up in this last year, the abundance of your blog posts, the quality of your writing, the videos, and so on. It hasn't been a long time that you've been kind of on the scene, but there's a depth to your experience that you bring from how you've been living your whole life, as we talked about it back at the beginning, all the way up back into your years in academia and so on. I'm curious if you have some words to offer some stability, some core, perhaps it's sense making, that you could offer to someone who's brand new, like literally that that singer from the opera that, you know, they talk about it a lot, but they just don't know how to orient to it, and they're grappling best they can. Let's just say that that person's very new to the conversation. Is there anything that you might offer as just a bit of what's worked for you, or what helps you as you try and make sense of this world? Is there anything you could offer to kind of wrap us up?
I think a good model for this is kind of a combination between hospice and Alzheimer's care. So one of the good strategies for Alzheimer's is whatever a person says to you, this person who might be having some delusions, right? You don't contradict them. You don't tell them they're wrong. You don't say, no, you know, your husband died 30 years ago. You're just hallucinating them. You let them have the illusion and you honor it. You honor whatever space a person is in. You don't fight with them and try and negotiate them away from whatever place they're in, right? So the first thing is honoring wherever a person is and not trying to move them, not saying, well, you need to read this book and you need to check out this website and you need this and that, right? You just start with honoring of whatever place a person's in, and honor the fact that you're even there engaged in that conversation, because that is an honor for you, that they're willing to have that with you. And the second is to take lessons from hospice, right? People will be angry, right? Michael Mann is angry, right? People will be angry. People will grieve, right? They'll be experiencing all of these, they'll be bargaining, right? They'll be, and it's not a linear progression. Any of these can happen. I find myself getting angry, right? I write blog posts that are livid with anger.
Yes.
And I've actually deleted a couple, because I realized that it was more cathartic for me to write the post than maybe it is for people to read the post. Right. And the same thing goes for tweets. Yeah. Acknowledging that we're all going to have these experiences over and over and over again, all of these facets of emotional experience as we're going through this process, and that all of those are okay. They're all part of this. There's nothing that is wrong about who you are because you're having a particular experience in the face of this knowledge. Yes. So I would say those are sort of the two perspectives I would bring and try and bring to any person who's just coming into this knowledge with an interaction that I have with them.
Great. Wow. It's just a brilliant summary and offering. Thank you so much for that. And really thank you for taking this time to speak with me and us in this particular pocket of the doomosphere. It's really been a joy. You know, it's rare in these conversations where somebody is just so boldly, clearly a person of integrity. You know, you really clearly walk your talk, and that's been evident. I think you were born with it. It sounds like it was just there, you know, from quite young, and that's a much needed and I think very nourishing contribution to the doomosphere that you bring with that. Yeah, I hope this is not our last time talking. It's just been a real pleasure for me, and I'm now beside myself interested and can't wait to reach out, as you've suggested, to contact your sister. It sounds like we also will have quite a bit to talk about. Elliott Jacobson, thank you so much for taking this time. And I wish you just even more meteoric rise in your in what people are able to read or watch in video with you. I think you are a very positive contribution to this environment.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for, first of all, how kind you have been to me during this interview, but also for the perspective you bring to this moment, you know, and your own efforts to find a center, help people find a center. Yeah. This is, as I started out by saying, this is an extraordinarily challenging time to be a human on planet Earth. This really hurts, right? Above all, it hurts. So thank you for everything you do to help us deal with our own pain and to help us find community. I so appreciate you.
Wow, very kind of you to say. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.